If you have a Premiere Pro project with Motion Graphics Templates and you want to create many variants of it using a spreadsheet, in this tutorial I show you a very powerful solution using the extension Automation Blocks for Premiere Pro. So here we've got a little sample project and it contains two Motion Graphics templates created in After Effects, namely this lower third here and this animated background. And these templates have lots of parameters which you can see here, and we want to change those with automation blocks with the help of data from a spreadsheet. So you need to understand two things, namely how to change these texts and colors and checkboxes, sliders, whatever you want, and then also how to read data from a spreadsheet. But let's first understand how to change these essential graphics values here. And Automation Blocks actually has some ready-to-use tools for these tasks. So if you go to Templates here in this section, you find tools which might already do exactly what you need, but here I show you how to write your own tool, which gives you the ability to customize it even more to exactly your workflow. So we start with a new script here, and let's check first the blocks we have here in the Mogrt and clip parameters section, which allow you to change these values, okay? So the easiest one to use is actually this block, which says replace in After Effects Mogrt the text1 by my first text. Yeah. So this is like a general search and replace of texts in the active sequence by the default in these Motion Graphics templates. And one thing I have to first mention here is that this works only with Motion Graphics templates created in After Effects. Yeah, templates created in Premiere Pro, these cannot be changed with scripts in Premiere Pro, unfortunately, and therefore also not with automation blocks. You can change their position, opacity, but not the text itself. But for the ones you created in After Effects, for those you can change these texts. And with this block, you just enter the current text, like team name. I just copy it from here and paste it here, and this hashtag is really purely optional. I just like to put my placeholder values, put a hashtag in front of it to visualize that this is just a placeholder. And notice that this team name is here and also here in my first Motion Graphics template. And since we process the entire active sequence and not an individual clip, you could put here the description of an individual clip too, but since we process the entire active sequence, if we run it, you can see it changes to my first text here and here too. Now, this block has some limitations. The first, it can only change text. You cannot update colors, sliders, and other things. And the second thing is you always need to know the value that this text currently has. Yeah? So let's say, for example, now we want to replace it a second time. Let me copy this and say here, let's say we want to replace it by mamoworld. If we now run it, you can see that nothing happens because this text is not hashtag team name anymore. It's my first text. Yeah. So luckily I copied it, so I can just paste it here, my first text, and run it now. Now the replacement is working again. So in other words, you need to know what the text value currently is in order to be able to replace it. And if you don't like this, and if you want to do not only replace texts, but you want to also replace colors and other stuff, this is not the block you want to use, and instead you want to use this block here, which sets clip parameters. Clip parameters are not just these Motion Graphics template values, but also if you look at a normal clip like this background video here, and take a look at the effect controls, you see here stuff like motion, position, scale, rotation, and so on. These are properties every clip has, and therefore they are listed here as by default, position, scale, and so on. So all these values can be set, but if you've got a Motion Graphics template like this lower third here, then you can also set those values. But they do not show up here by default, because by default it only shows the default values. So what we need to do is select a Motion Graphics template and click here on refresh on this icon. And after that, this list is updated and now contains all the clip parameters that this particular clip has. So for example, it contains all these graphic parameters here, which are the Motion Graphic template parameters, which we see here also in the Essential Graphics panel. Yeah. So for example, it has the text title, which is currently mamoworld, this one here, yeah, title mamoworld. And if we want to change this, you can just click on it and now put here the value that it should have. So we go to text and drag in here the text. Let's say we want to replace it by A scripts. And now instead of giving it the old text, mamoworld, now you need to specify in which clip do you want to replace this. Yeah. And clips are described in automation blocks by these kinds of texts that look scary, but they're actually not too complicated to understand. These clip description texts always follow the same pattern. They start with the text saying in which sequence the clip is located, followed by 2 colons. Then follows the track in which the clip is located, followed by a backslash, and finally the index or name of the clip itself. So at the beginning of these texts is always the sequence in which the clip is located. In our case, it's the main sequence, which is here in the root bin of the project. Yeah? So we could write here something like main sequence, or to be even more precise, we could do here something like backslash main sequence. Backslash main sequence means the item main sequence in the root bin of the project. Yeah? If it would be, for example, main sequence in the footage folder, you could write here backslash footage backslash main sequence. Now it says, please process the main sequence in the bin footage. Yeah. If you don't put anything here, if we delete everything before the 2 colons, then this would be, please use the active sequence. So if you don't give any sequence at all, it's the active sequence. But we want to have main sequence in the root bin of the project, just to be sure, even if another sequence is currently active, that we replace an item in this. Yeah. So after the 2 colons comes first the track. Currently we have our template in the track v2. So we put here instead of v1, v2. And now v2 backslash 1 would be the first clip in track 2. Yeah. So if we test this, run script, you can see it replaced A scripts here, and it didn't replace it here. Yeah. If we put v2 backslash 2, run, it instead updated it now on the second clip in this track. Yeah. Now, having clip numbers is not really ideal often, because if you've got hundreds of clips in your timeline, you really do not want to count all of them to know which one you're talking about. And also, if you insert clips later, for example, or delete clips in your timeline, then the index of the individual one changes. Yeah, if you delete this one, this is not the second one anymore, but the first one. You got the idea. So what you can use instead is the template name, which you can see here, or the clip name. So currently this one is called template BG. If you hover over it, you can also see it below in the box, template BG. And this one here is named template LT for template lower third. If you want to change this name, you can just right click on it and go down here to rename. But I like the name template BG, so let me just copy it here. Okay, so this means instead of putting a 2 here for use the second clip, you can just say template BG, which means in the main sequence, in video track 2, use the clip template BG. If you work with clip names like that, just make sure that you have unique names. So best rename each clip you want to modify with automation blocks to make sure it has not exactly the same name as another clip within the same track. Because otherwise, automation blocks does not know which of these clips with identical names you actually mean. This is really all there is to say about these texts which describe which clip you want to process. So let's do another quick check and replace a script by Adobe, for example. Run the tool, and now it updates it also with the clip name here. Okay. Now let's understand how we can change different values and texts. Yeah? So let me just duplicate this here and say we want to change not just the title here, but we also want to change some color. Yeah? So let's go to the highlight color. And we also need to change this in the template BG here. And we want to set this value to. And now for the highlight color, you can set it to a hex color code like FF0000. Yeah, these are the values. If you go in the Essential Graphics panel here, click here, then these are these values, hashtag and then 6 numbers. You can just copy and paste it from here. And FF0000 is pure red, for example. And if we run this now, you can see that our background color updated. So this is how you can set color values. Let me duplicate another time, and now this time we want to change a checkbox. So we should have here also a flip option. We don't have it because we still have the properties or the clip parameters of this one here loaded. You can see both these templates, this one and this one, have a highlight color, this one here and this one here, therefore this worked, but this template has no flip option, whereas this one actually has one here. Now, so what we need to do is select this clip and click refresh again to now see in this list all the properties that this clip has. So we click here, and now we should also have a flip option right here. Okay, this flip option is a so-called Boolean value. This means it must be true or false. So you could write here in principle the text true, and if we run it now, the flip option is checked. Oh, I think it was already checked, so let's quickly test instead false. I write false here and run the script. Now you can see it is unchecked, okay? Alternatively, you can also just use here a logic value and take this checkbox or this true-false drop-down. Let's go for this checkbox, for example, and say now it's checked. If we run the script, the flip is checked. If we uncheck it and run the script again, it is not checked anymore, as it should. So we learned how to replace texts, how to replace colors, how to replace checkboxes. Now let's also take a look at this blurriness slider here, which has a value between 0 and 20. So we duplicate this yet another time and want to set this time the blurriness value, which we've got here. It says 3 as default value because at the time where we click the refresh here, it was on 3. Yeah? So we set the value not to a checkbox, but to a math value, namely to a number. So we set this to the value 5, for example, and run the script, and you can see that now it has the value 5. Let's quickly take a look at the additional parameters you have here for changing values. If the clip does not have this parameter, by default it does nothing. So let's say you did something wrong with your path here, and the clip template BG is not this one, but it's this one, which doesn't have this slider, then it would just skip it. To be safe, you could also say something like stop with error. So you want to be notified because we really expect this to exist. It really depends on what you want to have. If the parameter has keyframes, this is really not relevant for us here because motion graphics values never have keyframes. But if you change the keyframe properties, so if you change position or scale or so of these clips, they could be animated. You could either stop or delete the keyframes and replace the entire keyframed animation, so to speak, with a single value if you want to do this. So let's go for the first one here to stop with error in all our examples. And now we've set these 4 values. And next we need to understand how we set those with the help of a spreadsheet. So with a spreadsheet, you have these file spreadsheet blocks here. Yeah? You can add rows to a spreadsheet, you can read individual cells or set individual cells, or you can read an entire spreadsheet row by row or column by column. And this is actually what we want to do. So let me put this here. And let's take a quick look at the spreadsheet we have. So here's my spreadsheet, and you can see it has a team name, which is the text that we want to replace in our spreadsheet. It has a highlight color, which is these color values. It has a blurriness, like our blurriness slider here. And it has a flip option with which we want to control this flip option here. So what we want to do is go over this entire spreadsheet row by row, skipping the first row. Yeah? So we say for each row of spreadsheet, and see that I saved this as a CSV file. You can export CSV or comma-separated value files from any spreadsheet application, no matter if it's OpenOffice, as I have it here, Apple Numbers, Excel, or Google Docs, for example. So anyway, in this block, we first need to choose the file we want to process. So I click here and choose my CSV file. Now it's the path to it is inserted here. And now I say from row to row. So by default, it processes all rows, but we don't want to process the title row because it does not contain data. So we want to start with the second one. So we just take a math value here and say from row 2. We need to define which cells we are interested in. If we go back to our spreadsheet, we are interested in cell A, B, C, and D. And they are team name, highlight color, blurriness, and flip. So I click here to change this to add two more entries, A, B, C, D. And here by default it says with cell A as my cell 1 and with cell B as my cell 2 and so on. And let's first give them more meaningful names. So I click on the first one here and say rename variable, and I want this to be my team name, just to make it easier to follow, right? Rename this one here to highlight color, and the third one to blurriness, and the fourth one to flip. So what this entire block is now doing is it opens this spreadsheet and goes over the spreadsheet row by row, starting from row 2. And for each of these rows, it executes whatever you put inside here. So for all of the rows, we want to set these entire values here. So we can just take this entire thing and drag it inside of here. Oh, and this is some leftover, I guess, from before. So we should clean up a little bit. So this is getting a little bit lengthy, but now this code is executed several times, right? So for each row of the spreadsheet, this is executed once. And now what we need to do is to say, for example, for this text, title text, this is currently set to Adobe, we don't want to set it to the hard-coded text Adobe, but to whatever my team name here is. Yeah, whatever is in cell A while we are processing this row. So for all of these choices that we made here, in variables, we have now a variable ready to use. Blurriness, flip, highlight, color, and team name. So here, instead of putting Adobe, we want to put here the team name. And here, instead of a hard-coded color, we want to put our highlight color. And here, we want to check, and in this checkbox, we want to put our variable flip. Yeah. Now I said before, as this value here, we could set a true or a false value, right? Either the text true or false, or such a checkbox. Now, if we use text from our spreadsheet, let's quickly take a look at the spreadsheet again. This one has as text an X where we want this to be enabled and nothing if it's not enabled. Yeah. So this is not true or false. You could, to keep it simple, write here in each value of this column either true or false. And upper or lowercase doesn't matter. Yeah, my OpenOffice here updates this to uppercase immediately, but this really doesn't matter. It would work with both. But if we want to say, no, I like to keep it like this, so X means true and empty entry means false, we could use a trick here. So we want to check if flip actually adds X or not. Yeah, set the value to, so we go to logic and do here an equality check. And let's set this to, we'd pick a text here, X. Yeah, so this flip text is now whatever is in the spreadsheet, so it's an X or no X. And then we do a test, say, is flip value equal to X? And if so, this thing returns true. So it returns the same as such a check mark, true. Yeah, and if flip is not X, this entire construct behaves exactly as an unchecked box. It says, no, flip is not equal to X. This statement is false, okay? So if we drag this entire thing in here, it says, set this value to true only if the flip variable is X, and otherwise do not set it to true. Cool. All that is left is our blurriness. This is easy again. We can just go to all our values and set the blurriness variable here. So again, what is this thing doing now? We can run this and see what's happening. Take a look at this here. You can see that it updated several times now, yeah? And this is because it ran over all rows of the spreadsheet, and first it inserted here all the values of the first row, then the ones of the second, and finally the one of the third. And these are the last ones, the ones that are our final result here, so to speak, yeah? So in the last column we had Adobe and this blue color, and so these values are now the ones we see. So it doesn't really make sense to process all these columns immediately without doing something in between, right? So what we want to do, for example, after doing all the work of the first row, is to add this thing to the render queue. So we go to Premiere Pro rendering and say, add to Adobe Media Encoder queue. And what do we want to add? Not the active sequence, but this one here, the main sequence. Okay, so we can go here to project items and drag in here project item, select my main sequence and click here on refresh. All what this does is to say, generate the text / main sequence, similar to how we have it here. Yeah, so use the item main sequence in the root bin of the project. You could also do this manually by just writing a text \main sequence and putting this in here, yeah? But this is like easier because you just need to select the item and click refresh instead of choosing, entering the text manually. So for the clips, we have to create these strings manually. For project items, we don't. If you want to have the item automation blocks AI logo in the footage folder, you just click here and you have it, and you click on the main sequence and you have this text too. Much easier. Okay. Then, using the Adobe Media Encoder preset file, here you can choose how do you want to render it. Let's go for a full HD YouTube preset, for example, and we want to write to the file result MP4 on our desktop, the entire clip. So if you run this now, Adobe Media Encoder opens, and then you've got for each row of the spreadsheet one entry in the Media Encoder queue. So here you've got our 3 entries from our 3 rows. So to summarize again what's happening, everything that is stacked inside this spreadsheet block here is so all of this here is executed once for each row of the spreadsheet. First, we set all the values of the template, and then we add it to the Adobe Media Encoder queue. Now, the only thing I don't like about this yet is that this file here, that all of our entries in the Media Encoder queue have the same name. And it would be great if we could reuse the team name, so Adobe here in this case, in our name. So instead of having this hard-coded text as a file name, let me copy this and also clean here my Media Encoder render queue. I copy this, and now I build such a text manually. And for this, I use the replace block here. So I drag this in here and paste here my original text I had. So as output file, we want to have in my desktop folder, not the file result, but we want to have result minus $1. And $1 should be replaced by what we had here, our team name. Yeah, so Adobe in this case, or mamoworld, or A scripts. So I get this variable just a second time, team name, and insert it here. So this means use this text, but replace the $1 by this variable. We don't need a $2 in this case because we just want the result name to depend on the team name. So I remove this second entry here, and now let's try this again. If we now open Adobe Media Encoder, you can see that we have now results mamoworld.mp4, result ascript.mp4, and result adobe.mp4. So let's render those really quick. And let's preview the first one now. You can say that it still has A scripts here, although it's a mamoworld one. It still has A scripts in the first lower third, and in the second title here, it updates mamoworld correctly. Yeah, and in the second also this background color, this highlight color is set properly. But in the first one, all of this, you still have the wrong highlight and the wrong text. And this is because we currently set all these values only in the template BG entry. Yeah, and the highlight color and the team name, we want to have this actually in both the template BG and in this one whose name was template LT. So fortunately, the clip parameters themselves, like title and highlight color, have exactly the name here. Here it's also called title and also called highlight color. So without any more changes, we can just duplicate this one and also duplicate this one. And it should use the same team name and the same highlight color, so no need to change these variables to different columns of the spreadsheet, so to speak. But what you need to change is instead of template BG, we need to here template LT lower third. And here also for the title. So, and that's it. Let's run a last test. Go to Adobe Media Encoder and render those again. And now we preview the second attempt here for the mamoworld again. And now you can see that mamoworld is updated here. Also the orange color is updated here properly. And it's exactly the same as here in the second one. Great. So this is how you create your own template automation with the help of spreadsheets in automation blocks. So you use this green for each row of spreadsheet block to iterate over all the rows of your spreadsheet. You save the cells with variables and give those meaningful names. And then you just use this in clip parameter of clip set value block to set the entries or to set the clip parameters here of the clips you want to change to the values of these variables. And last but not least, at the end, after processing a row we add the sequence to the Adobe Media Encoder queue, and we use some text processing here to give each of them a meaningful name. That's it for this tutorial. I hope you enjoyed it. If you want to learn more about automation blocks, you can just right-click on any of the blocks and get help, or browse the documentation where you find lots of other tutorials and also great overviews of the built-in tools. So with automation blocks, it's not always necessary to create your own tools, but you can also just use the many ready-to-use tools which we have here in our library. That's it for this tutorial. I'm looking forward to see you in the next one.